We've heard about Gandhi twice already in both talks. Ramin, he's central to your talk. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Alex, and thank you for the invitation by the Institute of Advanced Studies. I think that our presence here today, tonight, actually for me, but today for you, is closely linked to three questions that are the most crucial and closely related to our present situation in today's world. First of all, I believe the first question would be how to mobilize moral and political responsibilities. Secondly, how to strengthen human solidarity. And thirdly, how to democratize democracies. Now, talking about our world, I think that the past 100 years left us with a double legacy. On the one hand, it has been a time of great violence and cruelty represented by the two world wars, the Holocaust, atomic bomb against Japan, a great number of genocides and ethnic cleansings. And on the other hand, we have seen different manifestations of tolerance, compassion, forgiveness, reconciliation, nonviolence, civil resistance, which have been demonstrated and experienced by moral and political figures like Mahatma Gandhi that my colleagues talked about, Martin Luther King Jr., Abdul Ghaffar Khan, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, and Václav Havel, and many others. Many of these figures that I mentioned, they believe fundamentally that nonviolence is embedded in our nature as human beings. Actually, Gandhi believes that because he says that nonviolence is the law of our species. Well, nonviolence may be embedded in our nature, as Gandhi says, but it seems to be rarely practiced in everyday social relations and political institution building in today's world. And this is partly due to the fact that many around the world consider nonviolence as the absence of violence only, in the same way that they think of peacemaking as the absence of war making. But they're unaware, I think, of the fact that nonviolence, as it was practiced by individuals like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., was neither a form of passive resistance against evil nor a simple dynamic of resistance against tyranny. I think it would be wrong to look at nonviolence as a moral abstraction or just as a set of tactics. Even if we can use nonviolence as a strategy to fight injustice, what the experience of nonviolent movements in the 20th century shows us is that nonviolent action is always accompanied by a process of change and transformation in values and in action. So the reason is simple. I think nonviolent action is not, I would say it this way, is not a sprint, but a marathon. It needs longue durée runners who can make it to the finishing line. And this element of longue durée is represented by the transformation of the self and the transformation of the other in the process of a new approach to the concept of power. So I think the genius of a nonviolent leader like Gandhi was in transforming political power from an end to a means for ethical transformation of the society. Actually, if there is one revolution that Gandhi made in India and in the world, was a revolution of values, I think more than anything else. He practically changed our values, our way of looking at reality. And that is why I think like Henry David Thoreau, like Leo Tolstoy, he saw nonviolence as the work of civil society and not the state. Very rarely you can change the value of power with the state, but you can change it with civil society. So Gandhi's insight was that the power of nonviolence would be expressed more by an ethical and self-disciplined citizenry than by a self-centered state that acts through coercive power. I would underline self-disciplined citizenry because I think this is what is lacking in today's world, and the rise of populisms in our democracies in Europe and elsewhere shows us that the citizenry is becoming non-enlightened and very undisciplined morally, I would say. Therefore, there was no ambiguity in Gandhi's mind that there is no such thing as an armchair nonviolent resistance. I hope that none of us is an armchair nonviolent resistance. In other words, an individual who does not actively participate in public space cannot be counted as a practitioner of nonviolence. In that sense, we could say that nonviolent action is the direct consequence of the political promise inherent in human plurality. And here I go, like many others, to of our speakers, back to Hannah Arendt when she defines politics as the human ability to act in concert. We could say that while violence has an anti-political essence, nonviolence is a legitimate form of political action. However, in Gandhi's design of nonviolent action, it is not freedom, as you know, as in the Arendtian meaning of politics, but the empowerment of the weakest, which actually plays a central role. And I underline again the weakest, because Gandhi actually talks about that. He says empowering the weakest, the last in line, like what we were talking about, the people in Brazil. For both Gandhi and King, nonviolence is the empowerment of the powerless, and this functions only if there is a primacy of the ethical over the political. Throughout his life, Gandhi was confronted with the question of relationship between ethics and politics. I think this is very, very important. Our speakers didn't mention that or underline it very strongly, but I will underline it very strongly. I think Gandhi's goal and his attempts were to reconcile in his life as a political leader, but also in the realm of mass nonviolent struggle, the demands of ethical principles, and that's very, very important. As such, what Gandhi was and what Gandhi did was the opposite of what was declared by the basic theorists of political realism, who believe that one cannot participate in politics without being prepared to dirty one's hands. A reminder of Jean-Paul Sartre. And I think that's very, very important to understand. So I think that both Gandhi and King, I would put King all the time next to Gandhi, because these two actually, I think in many matters they go together. Gandhi and King proved that one can be politically engaged in the public realm without necessarily being interested either in power or practicing a coercive force. Gandhi was very clear about not mixing nonviolent action and power politics. That's why as soon as India was independent, he actually exited the Congress party, and he did not accept any position in the Nehru cabinet. He insisted that the politician in him had never dominated a single decision of his. So what Gandhi and King showed us is that a successful nonviolent resistance needs a moral leadership rather than a political agenda. And this is where I would come in our debate. I would say we lack, especially after the decease of Mandela, we lack moral leaders in our world. And this is where, when we get to general issues in our world, we cannot solve them. And our politicians actually are very weak to do that. And we saw it with the pandemic, actually. This is because a nonviolent activist or a satyagrahi or a leader of a nonviolent cause is not considered as a moralist or as a political moralist. Gandhi was not a realist politician who used moral language as an instrument of power politics. On the contrary, I think that he was a moral politician who conceived the principles of politics in such a way that they could coexist with morality. And that is why he thought of himself as a practical idealist, as he says it, meaning a person who draws his inspirations from moral principles. Now, for him, and what's important for our debate, the satyagraha strategy presupposed a permanent and unconditional application of the ethics of ahimsa and respect for life. So Gandhi embraced the belief in truth while he preached and applied an ability to self-discipline, self-restraint, and self-sacrifice. I just finished the book which is called Living in Truth, on Gandhi, actually, on Gandhi's paradigm, I call it, the Gandhian paradigm. And the book was published, actually, it was a few days ago in India. And I think that this is very, very important. I mean, we see when we read Gandhi that this living in truth is important practically in every page he is writing. On that matter, I think that he was also a situationist because he chose different techniques of nonviolence depending on the situation he was faced with. I mean, his fasting is a good example of it. Actually, Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence as a principal form of civil resistance can be summed up, I think, in three interconnected arguments against violence. First of all, howsoever urgent the need for violence, violence is neither pragmatic nor productive. Secondly, rejection of violence originates in an epistemological argument on the nature of truth. So again, we cannot, if we see it from the Gandhian epistemology, actually the nature of truth becomes very, very important as value. And thirdly, rejection of violence is ontological, actually. In this sense, any act that causes harm to others injures me also as well, because we hear in the language of nonviolence by people like Gandhi and King, we're talking about common humanity. This idea of common humanity is very, very important. More significantly, what Gandhi was saying is that the attainment of nonviolence requires an enormous amount of moral courage, commitment to truth, and above all, a system of public ethics. So it demands collective efforts and transformation. In other words, unlike violent struggle, nonviolent struggle actually educates. I think that's, again, an important point. Educates, motivates, and transforms citizens. And that is why Gandhi and King both distinguish satyagraha from other forms of civil disobedience. Satyagraha is more ethical and more valuable and more and closer to the idea of truth for them. For both of them, satyagraha calls for tremendous moral strength, which is absent in other forms of struggle against injustice. As a matter of fact, satyagraha is a theory of action in which the agent should become aware of the distinction between right and wrong, and should become sensitized to the need to fight for justice against the abuse of power. All these elements are there when we read closely Gandhi and King. Therefore, unlike many other social and political battles, in nonviolent action, we have a process of transformation. Actually, Ian was talking about it, Stellan was talking about it. This process of transformation of the individual and the society is so important. And as a result, Gandhi and King and many other adherents to our principle of nonviolence, they believe that politics is no more about the quest for power, but it is the quest for ethics in public life. Politics is actually should be defined as the art of organizing the society, and not as the art of creating in a Hobbesian manner only the sovereign, absolute sovereign. If this is the case, then necessarily the ontological argument, I would say, would be that there is no separation between the self and the other. The other is an integral part of who I am. So in such an action, there is no place for selfishness, because selfishness is to cause suffering to others. And this does not mean that the agent minimizes the reality of violence and social tensions, but that he or she argues for nonviolence by educating the social agents towards moral consciousness and the choice of nonviolence as the prerogative of the strong. MLK Jr., he considers actually two virtues for nonviolent action, which are absent in violent action. First of all, he says nonviolence is pragmatically valid. And secondly, nonviolence has the ability to appeal to conscience. And I think that's also is very, very important, this appeal to conscience. And that's why he, in responding to somebody like Malcolm X, for example, he says that he insists on the fact that it is dangerous to organize a movement around self-defense. As you know, Malcolm X, one of his points was always against Martin Luther King Jr.'s self-defense, that African Americans, they have to have self-defense. For King, the line of demarcation between defensive violence and aggressive violence is very thin. And that's when, in a famous speech, when he says, let us be those creative dissenters who will call on the beloved nation to a higher destiny. Actually, I think here, what we see is that he is mentioning more on the existential part of nonviolence, more than tactical only. So what I call the nonviolent democratic theory actually teaches us is that democracy and nonviolence demand a time of patience and a moral preparation. What history shows us is that the struggle against inequality, injustice, authoritarianism requires moments of public mobilization, of course, civil society empowerment, and insurgency, but I believe we should also distinguish between the eruption of dissent and moral resistance. Civil resistance can only be nonviolent when it is ethical, and is not because a reaction against an intolerable situation is successful that it is necessarily ethical or nonviolent. I think now, again, I'll go back to this idea of nonviolent citizenry because it owes its final allegiance and loyalty to the process of questioning of power and authority in general. So the key point that I'm trying to make after Gandhi and King and all the practitioners of nonviolent democratic theory is that any act of social dissent and civil resistance should be an act of conscience. In other words, we have here continuity between the obligation to disobey, what is the title of one of my books, Obligation to Disobey, and the moral and spiritual transformation of dissenting individuals. I think we do need to meditate a little more on the idea of moral obligation to disobey unjust laws, but we need also to talk about this moral responsibility that I was talking about. To end, I think that here we have a critical examination also in nonviolence. I think nonviolence is a very, I've been always mentioning that it's a very Socratic manner of engaging in the public space, because this self-examination is always there. And so I think we need to understand that nonviolence is an integral part of our civilizational heritage, but also of our democratic life. I mean, democratic life, even when it's in making, as I say, not in the institutions. And we must not forget that here lies really the only hope that we might have for the future of politics in our world. Thank you.